Hello everyone, my name's Brian May. I'm the Director of Customer Solutions here at Profound Logic, and I want to take a little of your time today to talk to you about a brand new product we have. I'm really excited about it. It's called Profound API. So what is it? Well, it is a product designed to make the creation, management, and deployment of API on IBMI or any other system as simple as possible. Here I am, I'm actually in the Profound.js IDE. So what we're going to do is we're going to start out by just quickly creating some API. That's what it's all about, right? So let's take a look. If I go under my database tab here in the IDE, you'll see here I've got my IBMI configured as one of my connections. I also have actually an AWS MySQL server running in AWS configured as well. We're going to use both through this demo. It's going to give us a lot of flexibility. So starting out on the IBMI side of it, let's just go into our schemas. I have a library called demo lib, and I'm going to come down to a file, and let's just use our claims file here. So I've got a demo that's based on insurance claims. The table here is called claims P. So let's take a look at that. So if I right click on claims P and I choose build API, what that's going to do is that's going to actually go out and get all the information about that table, and it's just going to go ahead and set up a set of CRUD APIs for me to be able to use and publish and work with. So simple quick click of the button, and we have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 API that we've already been generated for us to start using. So if you take a look, we've got all the basics here. We've got an API called getList. So we look over here on our API routes tab here, you'll see the list of all the API that are within this particular API file. We'll save this in a minute and I'll show you what the API files look like. But we have get list, which is a list of get a list of all the claims in claims P. Get one, obviously to retrieve one claim. Add one, update one, delete one. And of course, these were all just generated based on that table that we had. So let's just kind of look at get one first. So here we have, you'll see we have a summary, get one claims P, the method is get, and we have a path, which is /claims PS /CM number. You'll see the colon before CM number there. So if we go into our general info tab, this is where we set up all of this information. So we have the auto-generated information from the process. If I were starting from scratch, I'd type all of this in manually. But since we ran the generator there, we get some generic text here. So each of these things within the general info tab are very important. These are all used for documenting these API and building Swagger documents. But on the individual API level, it's extremely important that this stuff gets set up properly. So if we take a look at the name, I really don't like the name get one, so I probably want to change this. So I'll make it say, well, we're going to get claim. We have the summary, get one claims P, and it's just using the table name to try to make something generic. So we can write a better summary for that, I think. So we can just have it say get one claim. Our method is get. Now we can choose, any method that we like. But for retrieving an individual claim, get is the appropriate method to use. We have our path, so claims PS /CM number. So it's basically the table name made plural, and then the colon here with CM number, that's saying that we're going to accept a parameter called CM number, actually within the URL for this API. Actually, that probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense, so I'm actually just going to change that to just be called claims. We can categorize, subcategorize, put tags on here. You'll notice it put the table name as one of the tags. Maybe I also want to put a tag here called claim. And for our categories, I've created some categories ahead of time, but you can create your own right here just by typing in anything that you want. But CRUD, I have a category for CRUD, so for everything that I generate using the CRUD generator. A subcategory, you see I have one called customer, but for this I'm going to call this one claim, or claims. For our description, we'll give it a better description than get one claims P. Why don't we say retrieve a claim by ID from claims file. Perfect. We scroll down, there's some more information here. We can have the output description, so we can say that it's going to returns a claim. Cores. That's something that confuses a lot of people on web page, when building web pages, when building API, dealing with cores and the extra headers that are involved to allow other sites to be able to use your API. We really just simplified that to a check mark, and we turn it on by default. So we're assuming when you create an API, you want other systems to be able to use it. If not, uncheck it. There's a check mark here for deprecated. So that means this API still works, but it's going away. So you can mark that, and of course that would be updated in the documentation. Just for fun, let's mark this one as deprecated so that we can see that. And disabled. You can turn this API off with just a simple check mark here. So that's everything here in our general info area. If we take a look at our parameters, you'll see I have input parameters and output parameters. So it created that input parameter for me called CM number. It's an integer, again, based on the definition from the table. And it's in the path. Again, we had that :CM number over here in the general info. And it's required. If I wanted to change this, of course, I could come in and just double click it or choose the edit option, and I could change the data type. Maybe I want to give an example here, 1, 2, 3, 4. I could even put a description on each individual parameter. Again, this is not required, but it's extremely important, especially again when we get into Swagger and our API Explorer. So we're going to say that's a claim number. If we switch over to our output parameters, you'll see that I've got an object called data, and basically it's created all of the columns that were in our table as output parameters. And I'm not going to go through and put descriptions on all of them right now, but ideally you would probably want to do that. And then the last piece for this API, of course, is up here, the API logic. And this is very simple to do. Again, it's using our new low-code technology, so you can actually create these API and never write a single line of code. This is going to allow the creation of the API not just by your senior level developers, but even your brand new developers can work in an environment like this and actually be able to just point and click and answer questions and build entire API layer for you. So I have this routine called get record. We can go in and edit it. You can see that it's just saying, all right, we're retrieving one database record from the claims P file. These are the columns that we're retrieving. Here's our selection criteria. Again, just the column that we're selecting on, and we're using a parameter marker. When we have that parameter marker, we get the option here for the parameter value. You can have multiple parameter markers within your selection criteria. And you can see here for our parameter value, if I prompt on this, it's going to give me all of the fields that are available within this particular API for me to use. So in this case, you see it's chosen input CM number, and so we have a special object called input with all of the input parameters. If I come to API output, you'll see that we also have one called output that has all of the parameters that are defined there, so that you can use them. Obviously, using an output parameter for your selection criteria doesn't make a lot of sense, but you could do it. And there's even a space for special values. So the current user or the current date time, any special values like true and false or null. All of these are available, and I can choose them for my parameter values. And then I'm going to tell it, all right, well, what do I want to do with the record? Well, I'm going to put it in my API output. And because these output parameters were all named after the columns that were in the table, all I really need to do is say, okay, well, what output property do you want to receive the information? And we're just going to use that object that was created here called data. So output data. And that's where all of the data is going to end up. So that's it. So this API is done, and of course all the others were generated the same way. If I wanted to make some more granular changes, we changed the description here to get claim instead of get one. If I wanted to do that in a little bit more global sense, if you will, within this API file, it's important to know that you can actually go into the code. So if I come over to my Edit tab here, and you'll notice here under View, I have Design View and I have Source View. So if I click on Source View, this is actually the contents of the .api.json file. That's the API file that's going to contain all the information about these API. And it's just JSON. So you'll notice all those properties, all those descriptions, everything that we set up is all in here, including all the information used by the different low-code steps. Again, it's all in here. There it is: plugin, database, get records, what table are we using, etc., etc. So what I'm going to do here is I actually want to clean this up just a little bit. And this particular editor here, again, it's the Monaco editor. It's the same editor that Visual Studio Code uses. So I have all of those editing features built in. So I'm going to hit Control F here. And I'm going to find some things that I just like to clean up. So, one of the things I did in the designer was I changed where it said claims P to have it just say claim. Well, I can do that here too. So if I come in and I say, you know what, anywhere that I see claims P in lowercase, again, because I don't want to change my table names, so I click this button here and tell it that I want it to match the case. So now here we have, if you notice, it's highlighted all the claims P's. So I actually want to change those. And instead of them saying claims P, I just want it to say claim. So if I do that, I can hit this little arrow here, and we're going to, claims P. I'm going to change them to say claims. All right, here we go. So now I can go one at a time and replace these. I've got 18 of them. It won't take me too long. But I don't like doing the replace all because I don't want to mess something up. So by doing it this way, I can actually keep an eye on them. So I can say, all right, well, here we are at get list of claims P's. So there we go. Now it just says get list of claims. Again, the same thing in the description. In the tag, claims. In the path, I probably don't want claims P's as my path. I want something that's a little more human readable, so I can make that say claims. Again, the description, list of claims, tags, summary, tags, path, and I can just make my way through this and update that so that it just looks a little better. You'll notice it's not changing, because I did it using the case sensitive, it's not changing any of my table names or anything like that. It's just changing the paths and the descriptions so that they all look a little nicer. So there we go. Now let's just come back and I'm going to save this. And of course I need to give this a name. It defaults to the table name, which is fine, claimsp.api.json. So let's drop that in there. We can switch back into design mode and you should see that now all of those have the path of claims instead of claims P's, and all of those now say get list, get claim. Oh, I forgot, I wanted to change where it said 1 because again, that's not a good description. So let's flip back. And again, Control F. I want to find anywhere where it says 1 capitalized. I want it to be case sensitive, so that's turned on, and I want to change that to say claim. So again, I can replace those. So you'll notice that it's doing that on the name. There are only 3 of them. So update claim, delete claim. Perfect. Again, we'll come back and save and switch back into design mode. Here we go. So now you can see I have much better descriptions instead of just 1. And instead of having to go into each one manually and update the properties, because I have access to that JSON data here in the designer, I can use find, replace, and all those other types of things to be able to easily come through and make those changes. Now if we take a look at the tabs over here, there are a couple of tabs I didn't touch. One, there is a test tab. Let's go over to our get claim and the test tab here. And we want to actually run a test. So I'm going to actually go in and we're going to put our claim number in. We'll use 1827 as our example here. And I'll click execute. And that's actually going to go out, run the test for me, and show me the results right here within the IDE. I don't have to go out and use other tools in order to try to test these API. I can do it all within my development environment. So we take a look at our response here. You can see under the response body, I get back all that data from that table that I can then, of course is then returned, and I can use within whatever application I'm calling this API from. I even get some information here. For example, if I wanted to run this using curl, maybe I'm in Linux and want to run it from a command line, I can do that. Or it even gives me the URL if I wanted to actually go out and just open a browser tab and drop in that URL. There's the JSON data coming back from my API. So again, the testing is built in, easy to use, and it's super convenient. Now the other tab that I have here is my stats tab, which is really interesting because I can go into my stats tab and I can actually take a look, and it will give me all of the statistical information about the API that I have open since this API server was started. So I restarted the API server this morning when I started the video. So this API that we're looking at right now, obviously we just created it. It's been called 5 times. And I can take a look at all of the information about that API and how it's running. So for example, on average it's taking 295 milliseconds. That's pretty quick. No errors, 2 successful runs, and 3 redirects. That's from running the API too close together, so it used a cached copy. There are ways to stop that caching, but that's way beyond what we want to cover today. Take a look at the average payload. So for example, it's got about 197 bytes, not a lot of data coming back, but there's a lot of good information here within the stats tab. So that covers the IDE and creating a new set of API from a database. But I've already created some other API files that I want to show you that can do some really cool things. So if I come over to my files tab here, I'm going to open this one right here called Claim RPG. Now this API is actually calling an RPG program, calling an IBMI program, and then wrapping that up as an API. Again, very easy to set up and do. The low-code steps make this super simple. So if I go into my first step here, you'll notice it's called Call IBMI Program. We can actually take a look at the settings for that. I have my IBMI program name here in IBMI program, and then I have my list of parameters. So my first parameter here from my RPG program is actually the ID number of the claim we want to retrieve, and it's defined as a packed decimal, and it's 9 and 0. So I just come here and I can choose the data types and sizes so that we can actually do this call using IBMI data types. So I set up my definition, and then I can come down and I have my argument value. Now this is where I choose where the value is going to come from that gets passed to my IBMI program. In this case, I'm actually going out to a special value called input and claim ID. So the input value is automatically set up by Profound API, and it's basically my parameters that were passed in. So in this case, you'll notice if I prompt, I see API input, and since this particular API had one parameter called claim ID, we can take a look here and we can select input claim ID. Now, there are also all different kinds of values that we can choose from. We can choose output parameters that may or may not be exactly what we want. And there are also special values that we can use, such as current user, current date time, true, false, null. There's all kinds of values that are already built in that we can choose from. So for this program, we want to pass in that claim ID. And then the capture output, that is for us to retrieve the value after the program's called. So in this case, I said, all right, well, once it's the program has been called, any data that I get back, I want to deal with it. So for this first parameter, I'm just going to put that into an API output property. And again, I've got a special value here called ID inside of the output object. So I'm going to take whatever that program passed back as the ID, which should be exactly what I passed in, and I'm going to drop it into my output. The other parameters that I have for this program for example, the description and the date and the county, these are all really just output parameters from that original program. And so I'm not going to bother passing in a value. I'll just leave them blank. But I do want to capture their output. So again, for capture output, I can choose into an API output property. I could also store these in work variables. Work variables are temporary variables inside of the API that are useful for things. But in this case, I just want to put them directly in the API output. So I have an output parameter called description, an output parameter called date, and an output parameter called county. So that's it. This is all I need to do to set up that call to an IBMI program and to deal with the parameters that are coming in and going out. I have one additional step that I've set up here. It's called set API output. If we take a look, really all I'm doing is I have an output parameter here called success that I'm just setting to true. Just to pass back that success flag with the API so that the caller knows that everything went okay. Again, down here in my parameters, I mentioned claim ID. It's in the URL. That's what's coming in. My output parameters, of course, we have the output parameters we mentioned before. So again, I can come in and we can test this. Let's use 1841. And we'll execute that. And you see it called the IBMI program. It actually did it really quickly. And here we have our reply. Simple. But this, again, allows you to take any of your existing IBMI programs, easily wrap them up into an API and expose them so that they can be called by others. Now I have one that builds on top of this that's actually really cool. So if we take a look at this file here I have called Multisys. So the Multisys API that we have set up here is actually retrieving information about the claim from multiple sources. So I have that same IBMI program call. So that's there. All of that is set very similarly, except I'm not capturing all of the parameters. Some of them I really don't care about. I'm just grabbing the description, and in this case, the second parameter to put into my output. And actually, in this case, I'm going to put it in a work variable so that we can set all of the outputs at the same time later. So I'm going to create a work variable called description. When you choose into a work variable, you can choose an existing work variable, or you can just type in a name and that will automatically define a new temporary variable for this API. My next step, I'm actually going to go out and retrieve the claim classification from a MySQL database that's running in AWS. As we saw earlier, I already have that set up in my database tab. So if we come here, all I need to do is say I want to retrieve a database record. I'm going to reach out and use the database AWS_MySQL. That's what I named it in my database configuration. And choose a table. In this case, it's called claim class. And what column do I want? I want a column called classification. Again, set my selection criteria. And we'll have a parameter marker here for the claim number. We'll pull that from the input parameter of ID. And I'm going to put the classification column into a work variable. And if you'd like to see that database, we can actually come over here and take a quick look. If I drill down into my MySQL server that's running in AWS, under PGS demo, here it is. We have a table called claim class. You can see here that it has a classification field. Now, I've called an IBMI program. I've retrieved some data from the cloud running in MySQL, and then I'm going to actually go out and retrieve some DB2 data from my IBMI instance as well. So I'm going to go out to my claims P file here and get a column called CM complete. It's just a flag that says whether or not this claim's been finished, and I'm going to drop that into a work variable called complete. Then my last step, I've put all of my values into these work variables. So my last step is just to set the API output. So I'm actually going to come through and mark success as true, put the ID in the claim data ID, description in claim data description, the CM complete field into complete, the classification into classification. just basically loading up those output parameters. So I'm doing this in a separate step this time because I had things coming from lots of different places. It was just cleaner when I was building this to just say, hey, let's just put this all in one step to load the output parameters. And that's it. So now we have actually what would seem like a really complex API because it's pulling from all these different places, but it's actually really, really simple. And we can, again, I've got all of my general info set up here, all my descriptions, like we talked about before. And I can come over here and run my test. So let's look for 1840. We're going to execute that, and you'll see, again, it ran really fast. To be calling an IBMI program, retrieving data from the cloud, and actually going and retrieving data from DB2 all within one API, that was really quick. We can come down here and see our response. And so this is all of the data that we retrieved and put together for this API. And I think that is really, really cool. So we've gone over how we build API, right? How do we use the designer and build these things? But just as important is how are we going to manage this? It's really easy to manage right now because I have just a handful of API that are just in a few API files. But what about when you have thousands of API and they're spread out over hundreds of API files? Well, we have some options here to make your life a little easier in that regard as well. So if I come up to my API options in the ribbon, I can actually go down to, we'll start with the API Explorer. So the API Explorer is actually giving us a place for all of our documentation on these API. So anytime we create an API, all those properties we were setting with all the descriptions and labels, all of that goes into this API Explorer, which actually behind the scenes is a Swagger document. Or some people refer to as Open API. It's the same thing. But what we have now is we have this document, this Swagger document in the background, and this user interface is actually on top of that Swagger document. So we can come in here and take a look at all of our API. We can categorize those API, have categories for CRUD, and we can take a look at our claims or our customer APIs. We have multi-system. That API we were just looking at, I actually categorized that as multi-system so that I could break it out all by itself. And we can set up whatever structure we want here as far as the classification of all of our API. When we get to the API we'd like to look at, we can come in here and take a look at it, and this is all of our documentation about this API. So these are our input parameters, and of course, our descriptions of what is allowed to be retrieved. We also have our information about what is the response, even an example of what that might look like. And I can even come in here and test the API within the documentation. So let's try 1832. And there we have it. Even within the Swagger documentation here, we can actually run these tests on the API. And this isn't just for your developers. It's very handy for internal use to find the API that you have and organize them. But you can also expose this to your customers, to the consumers of your API, to let them go and figure out what to do and how to call these API and what API are available. And I mentioned behind this is the Swagger document. I can click this link right here, and here is the JSON data, the Swagger document. And you can take this and you can actually give this to whoever's going to be calling your API, and if they, depending on what language they're using and what tooling they have, there are a lot of tools out there that can take this Swagger document and actually automatically generate the code to consume these API. So again, Swagger is the standard in the REST API world for how we describe our API and how we interchange. So all of that is baked right here into our Profound API product. So now we know how to build API. We've talked about how we can search for them and document them. All of that's already built in. But how do we deal with performance issues? How do we figure out if this is running well? So we can actually come in, and I'm going to switch over into our API dashboard. So the API dashboard is, I think, one of the coolest features about Profound API. And that's because we can come here and you can see a summary of how's my API server doing. we can take a look and say, well, I've had 18 successful responses since the server was started. I've actually had 4 errors. I actually put those errors in on purpose when I was preparing this so that we'd have something to see. But we can see that there. We can see, the average API handle time is about 494 milliseconds, which is okay. It's a little overstated, but again, because I built in some errors here automatically that kind of drives that up. But I can get a really good overall look at how my system's doing. I can see how much the CPU is being used. I'm not using very much on my IBM right now, so you can see I peaked out at about 0.49%, excuse me. How much memory is the server using? About 55 megabytes, so not very much at all. If we go through the tabs here, you'll see there's lots of useful information. We can take a look at our requests by method. We can see, well, those errors that we were having before, those are happening for GET requests. So we know that we can narrow that down a little bit. But we even have error tabs. So I can take a look at what kind of errors I'm having. This is more of a summary view, but I can get into an actual list of the errors. So these are the last errors that I've had. So these are the 4. And actually created these errors by actually intentionally misspelling something on one of my SQL statements to cause these API to actually fail. But you can come in here and say, okay, well, these are all happening on the claim cost API, so obviously there's a problem there. But I can actually go and drill into the details, and I can see exactly what the call looked like so that I can go and recreate it. So here's the exact URL and the parameter that was used when I actually called this. So I can take a look at that. I can get some error information out of here. But the important part is I have all the information I need to go and try to run that API with the exact same parameters and figure out what's going on. Again, making the management of your API server as easy as we can. And there are lots of other things. You can take a look at what requests are taking the longest. If you'll notice, I've got one here that took almost 4 seconds. That was trying to run that when the server itself was coming up, so that's what actually caused it to go so long. But you can see I've got some running as quickly as 121 milliseconds, and then others that are taking, almost a second, depending on what's happening. We can take a look at all kinds of graphs here about how long requests are taking, and we can get into payloads, how much data are we sending out. And we can even take a look at all of our API individually here. So you'll notice we've got 4 errors, and these are all of our different endpoints. If I go in and take one of these, I can actually go and take a look at the API operations for a specific API and get all kinds of useful information here that we can use to track down any problems, to take a look at the performance, see if there's something that we need to tweak. So we've covered a whole lot, but I hope that after seeing this new product, you're as excited about it as I am, because I really think that this is going to be a huge help for a lot of our customers who are wanting to get into the API game, but maybe they're not experts in managing API and API servers, and they're not exactly sure, they're not great at Node.js coding yet. Well, using the low-code features and the new Profound API system, it allows you to be able to build these API in a very simple manner, no matter what your experience level.